For the past few years, societies have been rethinking some of the names that are on prominent buildings or what statues or monuments we should admire. There's a museum in Toronto called the Power Plant Contemporary Art Gallery that currently explores those questions with an exhibition called You Name It. It focuses on 80 geographic locations all over the world, including 7 in Canada, named after the 19th century Swiss-born American scientist Louis Agassiz. While Agassiz may have been considered brilliant in his time, he was also apparently quite a racist, particularly about African Americans. To discuss the exhibition and the questions it poses, we welcome, in Helsinki, Finland, Sasha Huber. She is the artist responsible for the You Name It exhibition. And here in Ontario's capital city, Gaëtane Verna, director and artistic director of the Power Plant, and it is great to have you two on our program tonight. Sasha, I had a chance, Gaëtane would know this because I was with her just a few weeks ago. I went down to the Power Plant, I saw the exhibition. It's really fantastically done. But let's start with the man at the center of it, because I think lots of our viewers don't know who he is. Louis Agassiz, Harvard professor. He died 140, 150 years ago, so he's been gone a long time. Who was he and what got you interested in him?
Yeah, so Louis Agassiz, he's from Switzerland originally, and he was born 1807 and he died 1873 in the States. And he was at the beginning really much more of a glaciologist and naturalist, and also expert in studying and researching fossils. And with that merit, he was invited to the States in 1864. He was supposed to have a lecture series, but he ended up staying there. So he moved to Boston and stayed there and started also a new family and worked there as a professor. And he was the museum director of the Museum of Comparative Zoology. And that is how he saw Black people and developed in becoming one of the most influential racists of that time.
And how did you get interested in him?
It was actually 2005 where I read a book about Swiss involvement in slavery and slave trade by the historian and activist called Hans Fassler. And in 2007, when Agassiz's 200-year birthday was celebrated, he noticed that there was a missing link in the presentation of his life, his celebration. And then he decided to suggest that there should be this Demounting Louis Agassiz campaign founded, which would rename a mountain in the Swiss Alps called Agassizhorn into Rentihorn. And Renti was a Congolese-born enslaved man who was working on a South Carolina plantation. And Agassiz used then the new technology of photography to document Renti and 6 other enslaved people, including his daughter, Delia, and try to prove the inferiority of Black people through these photographs.
Now, we will look at some of the art that you constructed for this exhibition in a moment. But first, Gaëtane, I do want to find out from you, when you saw this, what made you think, bingo, we need this for the Power Plant?
So I met Sasha in 2007 during the Venice Biennale. And early on, she talked to me about this project. And it's really interesting because at that time, I never thought Canada could be involved in such, a naming initiative. And really, it was a few years ago when Sasha came to do a residency at Axe Neoset, Artist-Run Center in Gatineau, that she emailed me and said, "Oh, I'm in Gatineau and I would love to come and see you in Toronto." And I said to her, "Well, why are you in Gatineau?" And then she then told me that there were 7 to 8 lakes and mountains and large glaciers in Canada named after Louis Agassiz. And then as the Power Plant is always interested in, showcasing works of Canadian and international artists, but we don't just want to pepper our program with international artists to say that we're showing international artists, but we really want their work to be relevant to important conversations in Canada. And as you and your viewers might know, we also in Canada have had a large discussions about, whether it's Ryerson University, whether it is the figure of John A. Macdonald. These are current issues that I think are really important for us to discuss, and to also see that we also have this legacy, and how do we engage with such difficult and important questions for our country.
Well, indeed. And one of the questions that almost always gets asked is, does the contribution that the person made during his or her time compensate for the fact that their views would not stand the test of time today? How about in the case of Agassiz? Do the scientific breakthroughs that he made 150 years ago redeem in any way his racist views, in your opinion?
In my opinion, no. I mean, his scientific contribution is a scientific contribution, but his racist views have also contributed to, taking people so long to understand, what was meant by those racist views, and the impact of these racist views still on today in the perception and the inequities that are put onto Black people, whether in Canada or in the world, and also Indigenous people, because Louis Agassiz was also very much interested in convincing people that Indigenous Americans were also a flawed race, and that people of mixed race were also flawed. So I can accept his scientific contribution, but I think that what we need to do is divide both, but what we cannot do is kind of offer these racist theories as just a blimp in a very important and intelligent man theories.
Understood. All right, Sasha, let's show some of the images from your show, which is at the power plant right now, and perhaps you could describe the significance of what we're seeing in these pictures. And let's start off. Go ahead, Sheldon, bring up the first one. Okay. Tell us where you are and what this is.
Exactly. So this was the first time where I made I call them reparative intervention. And it was so that I was invited to be part of the committee, transatlantic committee, Demounting Louis Agassiz. And that's how I got engaged in this more deeper, and felt I want to do more than just give my name to support this renaming idea, but I want to actually do something. So that's how I started to think, what can I do? And that's how I decided to go to the mountain with this new name sign and ram it into the peak of the Agassizhorn and make it happen. Even it was a symbolic gesture. What was important is that through this art action, I was able to make it happen. Even officially, it was never renamed to this day. Even we still have used different occasions to ask the mayors of the communes and people involved if they would not like to reconsider their decision. But in 2020, we did the last attempt, and they again said no.
Yeah, and just to be clear here, that's in Switzerland. That's the Agassizhorn. That is part of the Alps, and you wanted it renamed after a black slave from many hundreds of years ago. And the Swiss political body looked at it, I guess, at least twice, right? At least twice?
Like 3-4 times.
3-4 times.
Actually.
And then,
yes.
But ultimately decided to leave the name as it is. And I'm curious as to your reaction on that.
Well, it was in a way not surprising, but on the other hand, we were hoping that they would see the significance that it would make, also in relation to Swiss involvement in this whole colonial project, even they have not been a colony. And unfortunately, they didn't took this opportunity. And it is just important to discuss this and rewrite that history in a way. So this is also an important part of seeing the history not as a thing that is fixed, but that it's renegotiable.
All right, Gaëtane, let me ask you about the 7 or 8 places here in Canada that are named after Agassiz. First of all, when you told me this, it was news to me. I'd never heard of him. I'd never heard that we had places in Canada named after him. But can you tell us about what efforts there are being undertaken, if any, to change those place names?
So at this point, there's none. We did think that within the context of Sasha's exhibition, this could be something that we approach. One of the projects that we are, which is really of interest to us, is to enable Sasha to go to Agassiz Ridge, which is really in St. Elsmer Island, and up north, in the Arctic Circle. And we did get in touch with the person responsible for toponymy in Nunavut. But at this point, there is no full-time person in charge of toponymy in Nunavut. Nunavut being a very large, a space, land, and also the person with whom we've been in touch did tell us that they had more pressing, changes to be made. And so I think that my goal is that this exhibition really gets people talking, thinking, and create more awareness of this name and what it stands for. And we will be publishing a catalog to accompany Sasha's exhibition. And we will probably also start, possibly, I say possibly, start some kind of petition or some kind of work in order to at least, heighten our knowledge and our understanding of what does it mean for a lake to be named after Agassiz, and also to inform people and hopefully affect change.
All right, Sasha, I'm going to ask you now to take a look at this next piece that you did and describe what we're looking at here. Who are these two?
Yeah, so this is my newest work, shown for the first time at the power plant. And you can see on the left side Renty, who was photographed as a commission by Agassiz that I mentioned earlier. And on the side next to him is his daughter Delia. And the original photographs shows them without clothing. And what was happening is that 4 years after I did this intervention, and I started also a petition website for the Renty horn, the descendants of Renty and Delia got in touch with me and Hans, and that is Tamara Lanier. And this was really incredible, because I did think, who is alive today who is related to these people? And it would have been impossible for me to find them, but they found us. And Tamara has been able to give him his humanity back and tell that, for instance, Renty, he was a spiritual person. He was able to read, and he was able to teach this also to his children, which was, as you know, slaves were not allowed to read and so on. And one of the methods that I work with since many years is I use the air-pressured staple gun.
Yeah, I can't believe that. I want Shelton, bring this picture back up again, because yes, you have brought them their dignity by clothing them, and I want people who can see this to know how many hundreds of thousands or millions of staples have you used to create that image?
Well, these are not millions. I actually found out recently that I used about 1 million staples throughout the time I've been using staples. But these are several thousands of staples. And I call these works paintings, because there is pain in this method of shooting those staples. And the suit that Renty is wearing is inspired by a suit that was worn by Frederick Douglass, the abolitionist who was able to, get free from slavery. And the dress of Delia is inspired by the dress of Harriet Tubman, who as well was able to become free. And they were not able, Renty and Delia, they were not able in their lifetime to become free. And what Tamara Lanier is at the moment doing is to try to gain their freedom through a freedom suit that is currently ongoing.
Right. Okay.
And the work, which is important to say, I just wanted to mention, the work is made for Tamara. So at the end of the exhibition tour, the work will go to her home, and it's a gift to her and her family.
And remind everybody, Tamara is who?
Tamara Lanier is the descendant, is the great-great-great-granddaughter of Renty.
Amazing. And you have all come together in 2022 in North America. How many descendants, 4 or 5 generations later? Maybe more, actually.
That's from Tamara's family. There are not so many descendants, but we met last time 2017, and then in 2019 again, and we've been in touch since. And yeah, there is more to say about this really situation that I couldn't anticipate at the very beginning when I started this work.
Right. Okay, let's see more of your work here. Sheldon, if you would, the next one. Okay, Gaëtane, what are we looking at here?
So we're looking at a portrait of Matthew Henson, who was an African-American man who was also an explorer and who was part of the expedition that went to the North Pole. But of course, Matthew Henson being a Black man and reportedly being the first one to step on the North Pole, it took so many years for him to be recognized. And it was always the white individual who was leading the expedition who was put on the forefront. So this continuous erasure of Black people. And I would say that Sasha has a series called The First, where she's been documenting as an artist images of Black individuals who are their first in their different careers or different activities that they've done. And this work by Matthew Henson is part of that series. And we chose to integrate it within the exhibition at the power plant to, again, since we're in Canada, recall these histories that are important for Canada and for the world, but also to acknowledge Matthew Henson and to inform the public of these erasure of these stories.
Well, let's bring the picture of Matthew Henson back up again, because Sasha, I really want to know, you call it a painting, because the aches and pains you must undertake to put in each one of those individual staples into a very hard background board, it just must have been incredibly intense. Tell us how it is.
Well, the phenomenology of me working like that is very tiring. It's something I cannot do the whole day. And it's like, for me, a way of channeling that pain that also my ancestors have gone through. When I think about my mother coming from Haiti, my father is from Switzerland. So this is, for me, really a way that I can, kind of connect to that pain and make something beautiful out of it.
And of course, one of the fascinating things about it is, depending on where you're standing in front of the picture, because in the way the light hits it, it will look different if you're 2 feet to the left or 2 feet to the right. It's really a beautiful experience, if I may say.
Thank you, yes.
Now, we have one more picture. We don't want to forget this guy. Okay, Sheldon, let's bring the last one up now. And, okay, Gaëtane, who's that?
So this is Louis Agassiz, and this is also part of a series that Sasha did, where she depicts people who have been part of crime on humanity. And so she has chosen here to represent Louis Agassiz. What I think is very interesting, again, in this work is the time and energy and the detail-oriented that Sasha has brought forward in order to give us an image of Agassiz. But I'm particularly, if your viewers compare this image to whether it's Delia and Renti or the image of Matthew Henson, I think it's interesting as an artist, she has chosen a background that is now making him kind of disappear within the let's say the background that she's chosen to present this. And I think it's also important not only to name him, but to show his face and to put him in the series that Sasha has been developing over many years.
Okay, let's see it again. And then Sasha, maybe you could describe for us what were you thinking in terms of how you wanted to depict this man, who of course has become notorious through history now?
Yeah, so actually this portrait is from 2008, and it connects to the very first portraiture series I made in 2004, which was called Shooting Back, reflection on Haitian roots. And so this is basically shooting back on to Louis Agassiz. So at the beginning, when I started to work with this method, it was for me like, because the staple gun is like a weapon, really. So for me at the time, it was a way of reacting to an unjust history. So I was like shooting back and in that sense, defending people that were affected negatively by him and people that I was portraying earlier. But then I realized pretty soon that I actually don't want to use my energy to portray people like Agassiz or Columbus, whom I also portray. And instead, I prefer to use my energy to highlight histories of persons like Renti and Delia and Matthew Henson and others. So the method of stapling shooting became a way of stitching wounds together. So that's how I twisted this meaning for why I work with these staples.
Understood. And Gaëtane, just finally, tell us, how long is the exhibit going to be at the power plant?
It's going to be at the power plant until May 1st, and we're open from Wednesdays to Sundays from 10 a.m. to 6 p.m. And I also want to say that one thing that is really important in Sasha's work is that through the work that she's doing, she's also highlighting the role of photography as an arm of colonialization, of racism, as let's say, something that was used as an instrument to depict Black people and Indigenous people in a very bad way. And through her work, and I would say, especially when we think of the tailoring freedom, one thing that I want viewers to know is that Frederick Douglass in the 19th century was the most photographed person on earth at that time. And he used photography to conjure this image of Black people not being smart, not having a agency, and being animals or cattle that one would, bequeath to a family together with, the cows and any other property. So I think this is also an element that is really interesting in her practice and makes it a really distinct practice. I have never seen an artist work as Sasha has done and that's why I think it was important for us to present that at the power plant and to engage in real open conversation and to bring her subject matter back to Torontonians, to Canadians, so that we also acknowledge how we can make changes within our society. In that sense, art also has a political impact on the viewers, on the community where it's presented. And we've been so proud to be working with Sasha in presenting this work to people in Toronto. And I would encourage everyone to come before May 1st to see this exhibition that will travel to London and to Finland also.
Well, your blood, sweat, and tears, Sasha, are all over this exhibit, and we know how difficult it was for you to put it together. So my thanks to you for coming on to TVO tonight and describing your work, and Gaëtane Verna as well. You, of course, the artistic director of the power plant, for sharing your time with us tonight as well. Thanks to you both.
Thank you.
Thank you.
The Agenda with Steve Paikin is made possible through generous philanthropic contributions from viewers like you. Thank you for supporting TVO's journalism.